Oh, hey, didn't see you there. Just working on a math problem that has to do with the newest book I found. It's by Margaret K. S. Smith and Mary K. Stein. The 5 Practices for Orchestrating Productive Mathematical Discussions. So in this book, it talks about different ways to be an effective teacher in math. So here I have a problem. I'm trying to decide between gym memberships. Gym A has an entry fee of $53 and then is $7 per month. Gym B is $33 initial and is $12 per month. How many months is it before Gym B is more expensive than Gym A? So up here, one of my students created a formula. So 7x plus 53 equals A, and 12x plus 33 equals B. So here, I had a student create a chart. That's the way he used to solve it. So as you can see, he went 60 for the first month, then 67, all the way down, and he found the intersection point, which is 4 months, which we'll talk about this later, the intersection versus when it is more expensive. And then for Gym B, 45, 57, and so on. Down here, we had a student who tried to use this formula, but they used it a little incorrectly. So they ended up with 60 for the first month, which is correct, as we can see here. But then they just kept adding 60. And then for B, they ended up with 45, which is the same, and then kept adding 45. And then over here, we had a student take the formula, simplify it, and simplify it again to find the intersection point. So now, intersection versus when it is actually more expensive. So at 4 months, as we can see on the graph farthest right, is when they both equal 81. Well, that's when they're completely equal, but we want to know when is Gym B more expensive. So, Gym B is more expensive at the 5th month, where it equals 93, which is $5 more than Gym A. So that's the difference between intersection point versus when it's actually more expensive. Oh, hey there. Doing math, it's just such a mental exercise that I figured I'd come get some real exercise. So, last video, we just talked about anticipating and how you're like thinking about what your students are going to do and figure out if their answers are going to be right, if they're going to be wrong, and what the different ways they're going to do it. So, in continuing our 5 practice books, we're moving on to our next step, which is classroom monitoring. And Margaret Smith and Mary K. Stein, they ask us to walk around the room and observe, take notes to help us with our next steps, help our students out, give them tips, little tricks to help them, and just kind of see what they're doing. And in order to do that, I gotta be in good shape, or I'll get tired in the classroom. Anyways, you gotta train. Best way to learn math? Repetition. So I'm just sitting here, getting a little workout in, talking about the 5 practices again. So we're on practice 3, selecting. And before I get to selecting, you might have noticed in that last segment of this video, it was kind of hard to hear me. Your classroom's going to be loud, there's going to be kids kicking and screaming, especially if you're, say, 1st grade, kindergarten, and you just got to kind of deal with that. Classroom management helps, but it's going to happen. It's just an inevitability. So, with step 3, it's selecting. So, if you can remember back to that first segment, we had an equation, we had a graph, we had the simplifying of an equation, and then we had a couple answers that were slightly incorrect. So, I'm going to select to pick the equation first, because I believe that an equation is the building block to all other things that we do in math. Then I'm going to go with that nice graph, just because personally I like graphs and I think that's a great way to solve questions. Then I'll show the simplification of the equation, just because I'm sure a lot of kids will do it that way. And finally, I'll show the 2 ways that are slightly incorrect, to show students that it is okay to be incorrect. Like, that's just part of the learning process. I'll give you some help, we'll tweak a few things here and there, and we'll just end up getting a nice, even body of work, and everything will turn out just fine. By the way, gotta get in more repetitions, gotta learn my math. Oh, hey, just cooking up some math facts, you know? Gotta keep that balanced breakfast of subtraction, addition, multiplication, and division. So, we're on step 4 of our handy-dandy 5 practices. So this 4th practice is sequencing. And it has a lot to do with step 3, selecting. So, in our last video I talked about how I picked out someone and then I picked the order. So the picking of the order is actually step 4, sequencing. So you can see how they play hand in hand, kind of like salt and pepper. So when looking at sequencing and selecting, you just kind of got to go with it and use your gut and intuition to pick what you think would be the best practices and best examples possible for your students and your class. So as you remember, I picked out the equation first. And when sequencing, I think it should be first because equations are the building block. Then I picked the table, and so on, and so on. So this is why I believe selecting is important, and why selecting and sequencing are just this meshed and just perfect together. Oh, hey. After a long day at work, I just like to kind of relax and do some math, you know? Read my 5 practices. Which brings me to our 5th practice, connecting. So, as we talked about in the problem earlier, we had our problem, and it was which gym membership was cheaper after a certain amount of months. So, we had our equation, if you remember, and that's the building block, as I've said before. It's where we start from. And then we have the graph, which is the visual representation. So in the connecting step, I need to help my students build the bridge between that equation and the visual representation. And if I can do that, I can help my students accomplish that hidden step. Step 0, which is in this book, but it is not listed as one of the 5 major practices. Step 0 is identifying your goals and setting your objectives. So within our problem, our goal was to find when did gym plan B become more expensive than gym plan A. And if you remember, their intersection point was at month 4. So that means at month 5, gym plan B was more expensive. And I just need to help my students connect the goals of finding out when step B is more expensive back to the equation, which then has a visual representation in the graph. So I'm going to continue my reading and have a good evening.